Dr. Zhang, Australia's health officials say travellers from China do not need to be tested for COVID before arriving here, as it appears a dominant variant of COVID in China has also been circulating in Australia for some time now. But is this not the case in countries such as Japan, the US and India? Why are they requiring testing before arrival?
It's a very good question. My view is that perhaps it's really subject to the domestic measures and whether they have the capability to deal with all the travelers who are tested positive or positive negative. What they are saying is that for those travelers who are tested positive, then they still have to have isolation upon arrival. But the test needs to be done for the 8 hours before arrival. So that really means that if we are confident in our social health system and we are confident in our capability of dealing with those cases, then we welcome all the visitors upon arrival to our country.
So these countries are taking a more cautious approach, one could say, with some experts saying it's hard to assess the risk because of a lack of data in China. How accurate and transparent has the information been coming out of China during the pandemic, and has this changed since the COVID-0 policy was dropped?
It's not has been changed that much, especially very recently when the cases has been rising rapidly, and actually the government has dropped the information of releasing the information release on a daily basis. Perhaps it's too hard, too challenging to release all the information. But regardless, all various sources available is telling us that the cases has been rising very, very rapidly. So many people are doing the isolation themselves, or they are working from home, so they are still coping.
Well, for travellers wanting to enter China from January the 8th, they'll still require international passengers to do a PCR test before they arrive in the country, but they won't need to quarantine. What other rules will or won't change for those wanting to travel there?
For those international travelers entering into China, if they are tested positive, they still have to have isolation, but their isolation is really arranged by themselves rather than a kind of controlled isolation where you must stay in a hotel. So that is a kind of a good news, which really means if you are visiting your families and relatives, or you are doing business in China, you can isolate at home. So it's a kind of a very positive movement to welcome all the international travelers back to China, and also for those business, for those international corporates, international business that have operation in China, they are very, very keen to get their workers and office and the personnel to return back to China.
Will many people be looking to travel to China as the Lunar New Year approaches, even if they've been warned against it due to the surge in cases in some countries?
I think definitely is. For example, many Australian Chinese who haven't been back to China for the past 3 or 4 years, it's definitely that they are very keen to go back to China. And also those Chinese students who have been studying overseas, that they couldn't fly back to China either because of the availability of the flight or the very hiking airfares. Perhaps it's a very good opportunity that they don't have to do all the various kind of testing. So it's a good opportunity for them to return back to China for a reunion with their families.
And once the country reopens, what kind of surge in travellers leaving China do you think we'll see? And will there be airline capacity to cope?
I think that's a very challenging question. I doubt currently, in terms of the current capacity, that the airline will be able to cope, in particular for the Chinese airlines, because the CAAC, the Civil Aviation Administration of China, has policies in place, which really means that every country, the country pair market, the policy is different. It's really subject to the COVID cases, in terms of the demand, etc., etc. But now what they are saying is that they will return to, in terms of following the international bilateral service agreement arrangement, to allow the airline to to determine the capacity available in the market. So that really means that airlines will be able to have that kind of a capacity and freedom to organize the capacity to accommodate the travel demand. So for all those travelers either going back to China or traveling outside China is a good news. But however, that kind of a capacity increase perhaps will have to be a kind of a procedural, is a kind of a incremental increase in terms of the capacity.
And for those leaving China to other destinations, what impact will this have on tourism and business in countries such as Australia?
It's definitely a good news if we are able to welcome Chinese tourists coming over, especially including those international students who have been longing for returning to the campuses. So I think it's really very vital for us to be prepared to welcome all the Chinese visitors.
Dr. Crystal Zhang, great to talk. Thanks so much for joining us on The World Tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure.